Yes, and now moving right along, we're going to have a keynote conversation. I guess I probably should be there as well. Between former Commissioner Rob McDowell, Blair Levin, and I'm going to be asking them some questions related to broadband development and 5G and spectrum issues. So, coming up. So I'm going to try to keep this moving right along. I mean, we've got kind of a packed schedule today, and everyone here should have the bios. So by way of introduction, these are obviously two very esteemed guests, and we're really happy to have kind of a conversation about some of the big issues that could actually become quite important in tech policy this year. So first, starting off with Rob and then heading over to Blair, we've really heard a lot about this, about a lot of hype about 5G, and Commissioner was also talking about this a little while ago about the applications of 5G. What do you think will be kind of the killer application for the next generation of wireless? Or to say this a little bit more concretely, if you're a consumer, why would you care about 5G? Or perhaps why wouldn't you care about 5G?
First of all, thanks for having us, and many thanks to all the sponsors who put this event together, and many thanks to everyone for actually showing up on an icy morning. If we want to draw my personal experience from 4G, I think the answer is we don't know. The killer app's going to be what we can't predict, what nobody's predicting right now. So when we were cobbling together the basics of the 700 megahertz auction, what became that, and that we started cobbling that together in 2006, and that started in late 2007. We knew that this spectrum was going to be gorgeous, great propagation characteristics, and offer all sorts of abilities. But no one, the best and the brightest, really foresaw exactly what it did bring forth, and that was the sharing economy, right? The app economy is part of that as well. And so no one was really predicting that at the time. People were talking about enhanced video and entertainment and maybe some healthcare apps and things like that. And there are a lot of predictions, and a lot of those came true. Perhaps all of them came true. But I think what 5G is going to offer us is we can't foresee it right now. It's going to be very, very exciting. I mean, you can talk about whether there'll be enhanced haptics and the tactile internet and how that might help with remote surgery, or certainly driverless cars gets a lot of chatter. There's a lot of stuff out there that's being discussed. But I will guarantee there's something that is not making the headlines that might be in a lab right now, or just a thought in someone's head. And in 5 or 10 years, we'll be talking about that and how no one saw that coming. And maybe there's a whole segment or sub-segment of the economy that'll develop as a result, and hopefully the human condition will be improved. There will be some downsides as well as we become more interconnected through the Internet of Things. Privacy will be an ongoing issue. Cybersecurity and privacy together, you can slap them into the same bucket or separate buckets if you want, but that will continue to be an issue. Maybe things like blockchain will help us. That has a lot of hype and chatter right now. It remains to be seen exactly if that will be a solution to the privacy issue. But we just don't know, and that's going to be the most exciting part. We can't predict.
So I'm going to agree in part and disagree in part. I'm going to predict what the biggest consumer app is. Absolutely guarantee it. It'll be the biggest industry in the United States in about 10 years. Doesn't exist today. Online real-time sports gambling. Horrible for society, by the way, but I guarantee you $10 billion at least every Super Bowl, pass, run, whatever, despite what the Department of Justice did yesterday to help out Sheldon Adelstein. It's almost inevitable. I also am going to disagree. In 2007, the killer app was streaming video. That actually has been in terms of the use case. But it's absolutely right. Rob's right. We didn't predict Uber or Airbnb, and so those things are and it may well be that there's something. What's interesting is that the people who talk about certain killer apps like remote surgery, I don't understand how a doctor is not going to be driving a car and doing surgery, I don't think. And then they say, no, it'll be fixed. But we already have fixed gigabit Wi-Fi. So we have to make the distinction between 5G, which gives us some mobility. Then people go to autonomous vehicles. That's not happening on 5G either. The car companies are building the intelligence in the car because they cannot afford to build those cars and have them go on roads where there isn't 5G. And unless the industry can guarantee something they absolutely will not guarantee, which is universal coverage. And they shouldn't, by the way. I'm a Wall Street guy. They absolutely shouldn't. We're not going to see that. So I think there's been an awful lot of hype about that. I do share Rob's optimism about the American entrepreneurial spirit, but I think we have to be a little bit sober. There is a use for some of this that we aren't exploiting at all and where America actually ought to lead. McKinsey in 2015 did a report on the Internet of Things, and 5G is definitely related. The second largest category are cities, internationally between 930 billion and 1.7 trillion. There are incredible things to be done with cities having that kind of capability, but we're not investing at all. Cities are individually investing, but as a country, I think we really need to have a race to the top for how cities can use it to improve traffic, improve service delivery, improve all kinds of functions like waste disposal, et cetera. We're not doing that as a country, but that is a huge upside. And let me just close by saying one of the interesting things is everyone talks about the need for 5G leadership. No one defines what it is. When I asked Ajit Pai at a public conference in Aspen this summer, he said, we'll know it when we see it. Comparing 5G leadership to a Supreme Court decision about pornography struck me as a little bit weird, but I don't think that's a good enough answer. And I think it fundamentally is about leading in utilization, and cities are going to be the major place where we utilize this stuff, so I think that's where we really need to have more effort.
So, I mean, to follow up on that a bit, Blair, I know you've been critical of the current FCC approach to broadband deployment. A little. Specifically focusing on regulations and fees and kind of the more government side of things. So if you had complete control over the FCC, what would be your agenda? What would you do? What would be the first thing you would do?
Once upon a time.
Yeah. What a silly thought. No, look, I think there are two things that everybody ought to understand, and these are absolutely certain. The first thing is the digital divide is going to get greater. And the reason it's going to get greater is we have a far higher level of diversity, so that in Durham, where Rob went to college at a school that I will not name because I hate the college, but I love the city.
But you shoveled tens of thousands of dollars there to send your daughter there. So.
I did, and she got a great education, I have to say. I hated it, but anyway.
Kills him to say that.
Dean Smith fans, you know, we die hard. But the serious point, I actually was involved in helping that area, Atlanta, and a bunch of other places get Google Fiber, AT&T Fiber. They're going to get 5G early. It's going to be incredible. You're going to be able to buy a gigabit at a very affordable price within a couple years. And then you're going to have cities right next door where maybe you can get 25 at actually at a higher price. And the thing is, not only will there be a difference between Atlanta and Savannah in terms of what you can get, you're going to have a difference in Atlanta because 5G is not going everywhere in the city. Now, I'm absolutely opposed to build-out requirements. Let me be clear about that. But my point is, number one, the digital divide is going to grow, and number two, we don't know how far 5G will go. And so when you get a situation like that, I think the question is not what do we do, but rather who is best positioned, who has the best information, who has the right incentives to do something. And what I would do is free up the cities. Because as conservative, the political theorist Yuval Levin, who is not related to me, but whose book is nonetheless very thought-provoking, said the absence of easy answers is precisely the reason you want to have a multiplicity of decision makers. And I deeply believe that, and I deeply believe unfunded mandates are horrible, and I deeply believe in the subsidiarity principle that, you know, was part of the Catholic Church, which was kind of weird for a nice Jewish boy like me to quote. But I do think that city officials, they know more, they have the right incentives, and we ought to free them up. And the FCC is doing exactly the opposite. And let me just put an order of magnitude on it. To basically transfer $2 billion from cities like San Jose to Verizon and AT&T, in exchange for which AT&T and Verizon are obligated to do absolutely nothing, and in ways in which undercut San Jose's effort to deal with the digital divide. I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense. And then the justification they use is that if you save money in San Jose, Verizon's going to build in Montana. I am sorry. I work on Wall Street. I'm a liberal Democrat, but I work on Wall Street. That is a special kind of stupid to believe that. There is no evidence for that. It's absolutely false. Look at what happened in the tax bill. What happened in the tax bill was the telecom industry got $3.5 to $4 billion extra, which they used for stock buybacks. They used for dividend support. What is the number one priority of AT&T at this point in time? As stated by their CFO, it's deleveraging. I'm sorry. I mean, this is what I listen to. I don't listen to anything anyone says inside the Beltway because it's just silly. But look, I'm not blaming the companies. It's not. They should be doing those things. But for the government, for the federal government to think that they're going to spend that money somewhere else, that's just nuts. So yeah, I'm really critical of the FCC on that because I think we're going in exactly, from the perspective of 2022, we're going in exactly the wrong way.
Go ahead, Rob. Any
Well,
comments
which part
on
of
that?
that? So how much
So
time
no,
do we have?
okay. So
Which
if
part
you were back in the commission right now, what would you be working towards? I mean, this is kind of just generally about I think just generally about the philosophy of the FCC currently, but also if you were back on the commission, if you were chair, what would be your kind of policy agenda to get more broadband deployment into various regions, or I don't know. I just want to leave that open because I think this is kind of a tough question. We've kind of talked a little bit about it, but what is it that the FCC could potentially do? Because in many ways, not to say that they can. There are things that they can do, but I'm just wondering what would you do if you were currently on the commission in order to get broadband into more homes?
So there's a lot there, and I know we have some other topics to cover, but in just some observations, which is if you go back to the video franchising order, was it December of 06 or 07? I remember it was in December, one of those two. That was a bipartisan vote to, in a limited way, preempt localities, local franchising authorities to help spur cable overbuilding, essentially, right? Then under the Julius Janikowski chairmanship, we had a wireless infrastructure order. It was a cell tower, again, a limited preemption of local authorities, shot clocks, and back to Dean Smith, who forced the shot clock with a four corners defense. But in any case, so that was also a bipartisan vote. And it's interesting to see how a lot of debates in Washington have evolved so quickly. Things that were bipartisan before aren't necessarily as much anymore. And we'll let the last infrastructure order go through the appellate courts, but I think the intent there was to try to clear out the underbrush from what is inherently an interstate service and very, very important to our economic development and our global competitiveness to get more infrastructure built more quickly. And we'll see there's a lot of issues that'll be on appeal. But your question is, what would I be doing? Which is, if we kind of rewind the tape to the beginning of broadband, the notion of broadband did not come about as a result of the government. This was not a government fiat. At the time, maybe the standard was ISDN for internet connectivity when we were in kilobytes per second land. And so you had cable modem really beating the telcos to the punch initially. They were offering DSL, but cable modem was being rolled out more quickly. That was an unregulated service, and therefore was rolled out more quickly. Sort of like with Wi-Fi, which you have the combination of unlicensed and unregulated. I like to say when I was a commissioner that it was almost like on a Friday, nobody had heard of Wi-Fi, but by Monday, everybody had it. And that could be some of the benefits of having unlicensed use of the spectrum. So it's kind of, you should have an all the above agenda, I think. You need to make sure that government's not getting in the way. In some cases, maybe municipalities can help with their own services, but those are local and state political questions. Regarding that, and those are local taxpayers and voters who are involved. But for the most part, what can government do to get out of the way? It could be a federal lands issue. It could be a lot of things. So we've seen, more than $1 trillion of private risk capital invested in U.S. broadband infrastructure since broadband became a thing, and that dwarfs anything the government has tried to do. We spend roughly $8 billion a year on various forms of universal service. And still there are areas that are not connected, right? And so we need to keep pushing on all aspects, all the above, but make sure you're not stepping on your own toes as you're trying to walk forward.
Fair enough. So kind of back to Blair. I know you've worked a lot on these or obviously you look a lot as a Wall Street. I don't want to say insider, perhaps insider.
I don't think I'm technically classified.
Yeah. But just generally speaking, I mean, we're talking kind of these about some of these different different programs and kind of the problems of the economics of broadband, which I think generally everyone would have to agree in some spaces are actually quite difficult. So what do you think is actually some of the better methods to solve this kind of challenging problem? I mean, you said you don't necessarily want absolute coverage. You don't want necessarily, not to say that you don't want
build-out requirements.
Yeah, just build-out requirements. So what do you think has actually worked in kind of solving some of these challenging problems? I mean, public-private partnerships, have they worked? Are there kind of interesting places or projects that you've seen that actually kind of highlight a different way of doing things?
Yeah, there are a number of them, but what I would start by saying is I think the FCC made a big mistake by not actually looking at them. The FCC had its answer before it asked the question, and its answer was take away the right of cities to charge whatever they wanted for access to city property. And that's about a $2 billion thing, as we said, whereas it didn't look, for example, at the McKinsey report from 2015 that said, looking at 5G around the world, saying that you could save up to 40%, not 1%, but 40% of the cost by network sharing. Now, network sharing is actually complicated, and I talked to a bunch of the industry about it, and we have a problem in this country, which we should be honest about. Network sharing would help solve the overall country leadership issue, but it would detract from AT&T and Verizon's competitive advantage over T-Mobile and Sprint in terms of fiber assets. So that's not an easy thing to look at, but I think there were various ways in which you could have done more. I think there are various cities like Lincoln, Nebraska, which have had a dark fiber project, which leased to Verizon and accelerated a lot of deployment there. I think that was a pretty good example. I think the deals that San Jose struck with AT&T and Verizon were interesting models, as Commissioner Rosenworcel said. And one of the things where I think Rob and I disagree is I do not believe the FCC was trying to stimulate faster deployment. And indeed, the Verizon CFO said as much when he said, yeah, we love that decision. It will have no material impact on our deployment, because they really weren't studying that. They were just studying how do we lower your costs. And okay, well, if you want to do that, that's what you do. But my point is there are a multiplicity of things that really depend on very individual ways in terms of geography, in terms of demographics. I'm not worried about certain cities. I'm very worried about other cities. But the question is really who gets to decide it. And I think that one other problem that the FCC didn't address is that the industry is essentially asking cities to do something in terms of how it manages construction for one industry for really a relatively short period of time. Now, that's actually a really interesting problem if you actually studied it, because it involves a lot of software for quickly allowing certain things to be done. We could have had a national facilitator that could have helped a lot of cities lower their costs and speed up, and not have to worry about the shot clock. But the FCC didn't worry about that. They didn't think about that. It could have had something to do with the fact that they had 30 representatives of private industry on the BDAC and only like 1 or 2 cities and yada, yada, yada. But my point is, it's a very complicated situation in which one size fits all is absolutely not the answer, but you want to look at things. When I was involved with helping Google Fiber get started and helping then the project I did, Gig.U, 80% of the deals we did were about the same, and then 20% were different. And I think that was a far better way of speeding next generation deployments, with the fundamental point being that there was negotiating leverage on both sides. They came to fair deals, and by the time we had done about the 10th deal, everybody kind of knew what most of the deal was like, and then had to worry about kind of just the tail end of it in terms of what was particular as to the locals. That would have been a far better way to proceed than, again, the federal one-size-fits-all, which has having no impact on the market other than the wealth transfer.
So switching just a bit, at the end of last year, the USDA actually put the finishing touches, or at least put out the kind of a blueprint for what they want to do with the Reconnect program. This is a $600 million program that will have a split between federal loans, a loan grant portion, and then just a pure grant portion. So this is, starting off with Rob, it is a bit of an open-ended question, but when you're looking at programs like this, when do we know that these things have been successful? Like, what are the goalposts that you're looking for these types of programs? And I know, you were obviously at the commission and thinking you've talked a lot about, USF, just generally speaking. So when we're looking at these types of things, what are the goalposts and what are the outcomes that we're looking for to see that these programs have been successful?
Well, first of all, $600 million, which is not very much money in the grand scheme of things. These are considered to be pilot programs, and it does bring back memories of BTOP and BIP grants and all certain aspects of whatever other things the RUS has done, a little bit of echo of the Universal Service Program, et cetera. And every couple of years, every few years, Congress does something like this with the best of intentions, and those that are able to take advantage of it, if indeed they're able to actually build out per the original intent to serve people with faster broadband who didn't have any maybe before, then that's terrific. But $600 million, when you're looking at maybe $300 billion needed over the next 3 or 4 years to build out 5G connectivity, is a rounding error, not even a rounding error, right? So it'll be very hard to measure the success. Obviously, BTOP and BIP had their own controversies as to how effective those were when you start to look at them. But when you're deploying $300 billion in private risk capital, really, any investor will tell you you need to be able to have a return on that investment, and that is going to be, at the end of the day, what either juices the American economy through 5G or not, and not a $600 million federal program.
Can I just say I agree with everything Rob just said, and let me just add that part of the reason I'm here today is to see the rural panel, because I figure they're going to have more, they'll know more than I will about this. But I'll just make 2 observations, which goes to a larger question about how we do policy. Number one, my understanding is under the Act, areas which received CAF funding aren't eligible to get any funding. There are certain areas which basically Viasat won, the satellite company won, and what that means basically is in those areas, those folks will be, you could use the word condemned, you could say stuck with, or you could say enjoy. I mean, I don't know, but it seems to me that satellite isn't going to give them what they need for the next 10 years. And so that's a problem that I'm not sure had been fully thought through. And I'm not blaming anybody, but I think it's one of those things where you have to live and learn. A second one is on the tax bill. One of the interesting things about the tax bill, and this is the problem of running through a tax bill without having public hearings on it, is the way it's written. A lot of electric co-ops, I'm sure John Chambers will talk about a number of issues related to that later because of his fine work in it. But a lot of the co-ops can't get federal subsidies in certain places because it would threaten their tax-exempt status. And that's a quirk which can easily be fixed. And if they'd had hearings, I suspect they would have fixed it. And I think electric co-ops are one of the principal ways we can get really high-speed connectivity to rural areas. But my real point is, I believe that the policy is best when it actually has a learning process where you throw out ideas and you have people tell you what's wrong with them. And those are places where we kind of need to fix things. And that's not bad, but that's always the case. But as Silicon Valley says, love the problem, not the solution. And don't fall in love with your solution. Be passionate about solving the problem. And I don't think that's the way our policy process is working.
So if I can sort of build to earlier, which is, if we want to connect rural America, there are a number of ways to do that. Certainly, there's some market failure. There's places where the market just is not working. Back in the old days, you had to string 20, 30 miles of telephone poles and wire to serve one rancher, and you're never going to get a return on your investment for that, right? So that's where things like universal service come in very handy. But as we become more spectrally efficient. And as Commissioner Rosenworcel was talking about various frequencies, when I was a commissioner, there are frequencies that never would have been thought of for broadband or connectivity that are now being auctioned and are being built out. But not everything can be auctioned. Not everything suits itself well to auction. So there is, in rural areas in particular, tremendous opportunity for unlicensed spectrum use. And there's a terrific ecosystem that can be created through unlicensed use, and anyone can use it. And again, it's back to that Wi-Fi example I said before, which is, on Friday nobody had heard of it, Monday everybody had it. And if you can come up with policies that bring some certainty as to what the mix of licensed and unlicensed will be in rural areas, I think you'd see a tremendous proliferation of build-out in areas, because that can be a very cheap way to either have backhaul or point-to-multipoint or point-to-point connectivity, all the above. And it's something that I hope this will be the year that the FCC takes an additional step, especially in the area of TV white spaces.
And also, just to follow up a little bit with that, Blair, are you bearish or bullish on satellite? You kind of mentioned it, but I was just wondering, if you were working with an investor now, would you suggest that they look at this as a potential investment or not in the future?
Oh, there are so many different ways of answering it. I guess what I would say is, if you state it that way, I am bearish. But it could be that I remember with great fondness watching Teledesic get huge investment
Yes.
by all the smartest people in the late 90s, and that failed. I'm actually, most of my time for the last year has been working on a project involving the World Bank and UNHCR on how do we get broadband to refugees. And, satellites are kind of this thing you really want to hope for. But at the end of the day, there are just a million ways it can go wrong. And I would love to be wrong. I would love to be bullish, but I just...
Can I build on that real quick?
Yeah.
But I don't think of myself as an expert, so don't take my word for
Fair
it.
enough, fair.
So, and this is an important issue. So actually, with Commissioner Rosenworcel, it was mentioned you made a trip to the Arctic, and I worked for 2 years on an Arctic broadband plan with the Arctic Economic Council. And that was one of the most fascinating projects I've ever worked on. We finished that work about 2 years ago. And there are going to be some parts of the planet Earth where satellites are the only connectivity, right? Speeds are getting faster. And so if that's all you've got, that's all you've got. But technology, again, is going to help make those speeds faster and latency less. Will it be the same as a big fat piece of fiber? No. But you'll have the added benefits of mobility and being able to go into remote areas. So it's, again, back to, you have to have an all of the above type answer to these things and not cut off any options.
So as a final question, and this is to both of you, what is something that we're not paying attention to right now that will be important in this year and the coming years? What is a thing that or a topic or an issue that you think that there's just hasn't been enough attention being paid to that actually will become or potentially could become very important in the future?
Okay. I think it's the stage 4 cancer in the Universal Service Program, which is the contribution factor. It continues to grow.
Stage 4 cancer. Wow, that's.
I think you'd agree. It's, by the way,
quote.
It's been stage 4 cancer since 2008. But it's inevitable that that's going to fall apart, right? Because what we're essentially putting a fee on, whether you call it a tax or not, that's going down. The demand is going up. People will avoid it. The last time the commission actually took a serious look at it, you were on the commission, it was, I can safely predict it will only be addressed in the 3 months between the end of a presidential campaign and an inauguration, because that's the only safe time to do it. And I'm not being critical of, the commissioners for that political reality. It's a really hard problem. I think the last time it happened, you voted against Chairman Martin's plan to use phone numbers. Whatever I think of the plan then, I'm not sure that would. He didn't bring it to a vote because you and the 2 Democrats, I think, said no. Whatever. Yeah. But anyway, but then it was never brought up again, and so and Janikowski didn't deal with it. Wheeler didn't deal with it. Pai's not dealing with it. So I think it'll be the next commission that actually where the symptoms start to show. But that's one that we're going to have to deal with, and the politics of doing it, and it's going to get worse because we're going to have billions of more devices connected, and the question of whether we impose a fee on them. It's going to be both mechanically harder, and the economics is going to get tougher. So that's just sitting out there, and nobody wants to talk about it, except occasionally me, just because it's fun.
Actually, he raises a very good point for purposes of this event, and actually linking contribution with distribution is something I talked about as a commissioner. I did also talk about the need to broaden the base if you're going to continue to support this, as to whether that's phone numbers, connections, whatever, that then you all of a sudden create all sorts of headlines and about taxing the internet or other such things which people just don't want to deal with. You're absolutely right. And so each chairman has said, let's work on the distribution side, but forget about, kick the can down the road, brush it under the rug, and meanwhile the contribution factor percentage starts going up and up and up, and that's because the pool that you're drawing from is shrinking and shrinking, and we're spending the same or more. So it's a very good thing to bring up, but you're right, it's probably not going to get addressed for years, and so then what will the funding mechanism be? But overall, your question was sort of very broad and open-ended, and I'll go back to where I started, which is the thing that nobody is talking about now is what nobody can see, and we don't know what that is.
The unseen.
The unseen, and it's going to be both wonderful, there'll be a bucket of wonderful things, and there'll be a bucket of horrible, horrifying things that come about as a result of enhanced connectivity. And so I tend to be an optimist, which so net, I think it's all positive. But Blair's also right in that it's probably going to be something involving porn or gambling, right? So,
Okay, with
that
that,
really drives broadband.
please join me in thanking our two guests, Blair Levin and Rob McDowell.